Welcome to Sleepy Science Student, where we explore the wonders of science one peaceful breath at a time. Tonight, we're going on a slow, gentle journey through something truly remarkable, the entire history of life on Earth, spanning 4 billion years of quiet evolution, patient adaptation, and the soft unfolding of complexity from the simplest beginnings. I hope this video isn't too interesting, though, if it does happen to keep you awake, at least you'll be learning something fascinating about where we all came from, how life emerged from lifeless chemistry, and the long, winding path that led to you lying here right now. Not the worst way to spend a sleepless night. Before we drift back through the ages together, I'd love it if you gave this video a like and maybe even subscribed if you haven't already. It really helps this curious little channel grow and means more people can find these gentle explorations of the natural world. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you tuning in from a cozy bed in Melbourne at 2 in the morning, or listening from a quiet room in Stockholm at 7 in the evening while the summer sun refuses to set? Let me know in the comments. It's always such a joy to see the Sleepy Science community scattered gently across the globe, all of us connected by curiosity and the soft pull of wonder. Now, settle in. Get comfortable. You don't need to remember any of this. You don't need to take notes or stay alert for a quiz. Just let the words wash over you like warm waves on an ancient shore, where perhaps the very first stirrings of life once emerged. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow down. And as we begin this gentle voyage through deep time, remember this video is for educational and relaxation purposes only. It's not intended as medical advice, a substitute for paleontology classes, or a guarantee that you'll dream of trilobites, though that would be rather charming. Ready? Let's begin. Let's start at the very beginning, roughly 4.5 billion years ago. Though to call it a beginning makes it sound gentle, and Earth's birth was anything but. Our planet formed from a swirling disk of dust and gas, orbiting a young star, our sun, still finding its rhythm in the cosmic dance. Picture this disk, if you will. Imagine a vast, flat spiral of particles, each one drifting through space, occasionally bumping into others. It's a bit like watching dust motes float in a beam of sunlight streaming through your window, except on an incomprehensibly larger scale, and with gravity as the choreographer. These particles collided, stuck together, grew larger. Slowly, patiently, over millions of years, they accumulated into larger clumps. Pebbles became boulders. Boulders became mountains floating in space. Mountains became worlds. Earth was one of these worlds, growing quietly in the inner solar system where it was warm enough for rock to form, but not so hot that everything remained gas. It grew through a process called accretion, which is really just a fancy word for things sticking together. Each impact added mass. Each collision contributed to what would eventually become our home. And with each addition, Earth's gravity strengthened, allowing it to pull in even more material. The young Earth was nothing like the planet we know. There were no continents, no oceans, no atmosphere as we'd recognize it. The surface was molten, a global ocean of liquid rock glowing orange and red with heat. Picture lava. But not just a flow or a pool. Imagine the entire surface of a planet made of liquid rock, churning and bubbling, radiating heat into the darkness of space. It's difficult to comprehend, but that was Earth's infancy. The heat came from multiple sources. First, the energy of all those impacts, of billions of objects crashing into the growing planet, their kinetic energy converted to heat. Second, the compression of material under its own gravity, which generates tremendous heat. And third, radioactive decay. Earth contains radioactive elements that release heat as they decay. And in the early days, there were far more of these elements than exist today. All of this combined to keep early Earth molten for millions of years. But here's where things get intense, though we'll discuss it softly. Early Earth was not the peaceful blue marble we know today. It was a hellish world of molten rock, constant bombardment, and temperatures that would vaporize any life form we can imagine. The surface was an ocean of liquid magma, glowing red and orange, radiating heat into the darkness of space. There was no solid ground to stand on, no water to drink, no air to breathe as we know it. The atmosphere, such as it was, consisted primarily of hydrogen, helium, and various other gases belched from the planet's interior. Methane, ammonia, water vapor, carbon dioxide. It would have been utterly toxic to us. The sky probably glowed with the heat of the surface below, creating an eerie, perpetual twilight. If you could have stood there, which you couldn't, you would have seen a sky without blue, without clouds, without any of the familiar features we associate with home. This period in Earth's history has a rather dramatic name, the Hadean Eon. Named after Hades, the ancient Greek underworld, it captures something of the infernal nature of early Earth, and the name fits. This was Earth's childhood, violent and chaotic, lasting from about 4.6 to 4 billion years ago. During this time, our planet was still being shaped by tremendous forces, still settling into what it would become. The Hadean Eon stretched across 600 million years, more time than has passed since complex animals evolved. It's worth pausing to appreciate that scale. 600 million years of a molten, inhospitable world, being constantly reshaped by impacts and internal heat. If you could watch this period in fast forward, you'd see Earth, glowing, periodically brightening with massive impacts, gradually cooling, its surface slowly transitioning from entirely molten to partially solid, with a thin crust forming and breaking and reforming over and over. One event stands out with particular significance during the Hadean. Scientists call it the Giant Impact, or sometimes Theia Impact, named after a hypothetical protoplanet about the size of Mars. According to our best understanding, this Mars-sized body collided with early Earth around 4.5 billion years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. Take a breath. Imagine a world smashing into a world. The impact was catastrophic on a scale difficult to comprehend. When Theia struck Earth, it didn't just leave a crater. It liquefied portions of both worlds. Rock vaporized. Enormous quantities of material were ejected into orbit. The impact probably lasted only minutes, but in those minutes, it fundamentally reshaped both bodies. Some of Theia's core merged with Earth's core, sinking down through the molten interior. Some of Earth's mantle was blasted into space. Some of this material rained back down. Some escaped into space, but a significant amount remained in orbit, forming a ring of debris around Earth, glowing like some cosmic jewelry. Computer simulations of this impact are breathtaking to watch, though of course they're just approximations based on physics and evidence. They show Theia approaching Earth at an angle, the two bodies colliding and merging, material streaming out in great arcs, the combined mass reforming into Earth, while debris orbits overhead. The energy released would have been equivalent to perhaps 100 million times the impact that killed the dinosaurs. It's hard to find analogies adequate to the scale. It was quite simply one of the most violent events in our planet's history. Over time, perhaps just a few thousand years, this ring of debris coalesced. Gravity pulled it together, piece by piece, into a sphere. This sphere became our moon. Even today, if you look up at night, you're seeing the result of that ancient collision, that violent birth that created Earth's constant companion. The moon has been slowly drifting away from us ever since, at a rate of about 3.8 centimeters per year. But back then, it would have loomed enormous in the sky, perhaps 10 to 20 times larger in appearance than it does now. The moon's presence had profound effects on early Earth. Its gravitational pull created enormous tides, far more powerful than anything we experience today. When the moon was closer, these tides would have been spectacular, perhaps hundreds of meters high, racing across the surface of the magma ocean. As the surface cooled and oceans formed, these tides continued, though affecting water rather than molten rock. The tidal forces also stabilized Earth's rotation, preventing the planet from wobbling chaotically on its axis, which helped create more stable climate conditions. These tides may have been important for the development of life later on, creating tidal pools where organic chemistry could concentrate and experiment with different combinations. The regular cycle of wetting and drying, covering and exposing, may have helped certain molecules form and organize, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Gently now, let's not rush through the Hadean. There's still more to understand about this violent beginning. After the giant impact, Earth slowly began to cool. The surface gradually solidified, forming the first true crust. It's rather remarkable, really, that a ball of molten rock floating in space can cool enough to develop a solid shell. You might think space is cold, and in a sense it is, but there's no air to conduct heat away, so cooling happens through radiation, a slow and patient process. The molten surface radiates heat as infrared light, gradually losing energy, slowly cooling down over millions of years. The first crust that formed was probably similar to basalt, a dark, iron-rich volcanic rock. This crust was thin, unstable, constantly breaking and reforming as convection currents in the mantle below churned and moved. It's a bit like the skin that forms on cooling pudding, except this skin could be hundreds of kilometers thick and was constantly being disrupted by volcanic activity and residual heat from below. Nothing was permanent. Everything was in flux. By about 4.4 billion years ago, Earth had cooled enough that liquid water could exist on its surface. We know this from tiny crystals called zircons found in Australia, which are among the oldest materials on Earth. These zircons, some as old as 4.4 billion years, contain chemical signatures suggesting they formed in the presence of liquid water. Specifically, they have oxygen isotope ratios that indicate they crystallized from magma that had interacted with water. It's detective work of the finest kind, reading the history of water on Earth from atomic ratios in crystals smaller than a grain of sand. Water, that simple molecule of two hydrogen atoms bonded to one oxygen, had arrived. Where it came from remains a gentle mystery, perhaps from volcanic outgassing, perhaps delivered by comets, probably both. Volcanoes release water vapor along with other gases, and early Earth was volcanically active. Comets, which are essentially dirty snowballs from the outer solar system, contain enormous amounts of water ice. Billions of comets impacted Earth during the Hadean, each one potentially contributing water to the growing oceans. With water came the possibility of something new. Water is not just a liquid, it's a solvent, a medium, a facilitator of chemistry. In water, molecules can meet, interact, bond, and separate in ways impossible in solid rock or open space. Water allows chemistry to dance. Molecules dissolve, diffuse, encounter each other, react, and the products dissolve away or precipitate out. It's a dynamic environment, full of possibilities. And in that dance, over countless millions of years, something extraordinary would emerge. But not yet. For now, Earth was still being bombarded. The late heavy bombardment, which lasted until about 3.8 billion years ago, saw the inner solar system repeatedly struck by asteroids and comets. This period is somewhat controversial among scientists. Some argue it was a discrete event, a sudden increase in bombardment, while others think it was just the tail end of the initial accretion. But regardless of the details, impacts remained common and devastating throughout the Hadean and into the early Archean. Each major impact had catastrophic effects. Large impacts would vaporize portions of the ocean, creating steam atmospheres that would take thousands of years to rain back down. They would melt the surface crust, creating fresh magma oceans that would take millennia to solidify. They would inject enormous amounts of energy into the system, disrupting whatever chemical organization might have been developing. Earth's surface was repeatedly sterilized by these impacts, its crust melted and remelted. Any early attempts at life, if they occurred, would have been repeatedly extinguished. The universe was not yet ready to be gentle, yet even in this chaos, Processes were occurring that would prove important for life. Chemical weathering of rocks released minerals into the oceans. Volcanic gases built up the atmosphere. Lightning provided energy for driving chemical reactions in the atmosphere and oceans. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun, unimpeded by any ozone layer, struck the surface and drove photochemistry. Hydrothermal systems formed where seawater circulated through hot rock, creating chemical gradients and energy sources. The stage was being prepared, even if the play hadn't yet begun. Still, slowly, the bombardment lessened. The solar system was cleaning itself up, its orbits settling into more stable configurations. Most of the debris had either been swept up by planets or ejected from the inner solar system entirely. Impacts became less frequent, less catastrophic. Earth cooled further. The crust thickened, becoming more stable. By about 4 billion years ago, as the Hadean transitioned into the Archean Eon, Earth was becoming a place where perhaps, just perhaps, something like life could begin to persist. Continents began to form, though they would have been unrecognizable to us, small, unstable, constantly being subsumed back into the mantle through early tectonic processes. The planet was finding its rhythm, establishing cycles that would continue for billions of years. The water cycle emerged, evaporation from oceans, precipitation onto land, rivers flowing back to the sea. Volcanic cycles pumped gases into the atmosphere and brought heat to the surface. Tectonic cycles moved rock from the surface down into the mantle and back up again, creating mountains and valleys, trenches and ridges. And somewhere in all of this violence, in the chaos and heat and chemical experimentation, the stage was being set. The ingredients were gathering. Earth was becoming a place where life could, perhaps, emerge. The temperature was right. Not too hot, not too cold. Water was present. Energy was available from the sun, from chemical reactions, from volcanic heat. Simple organic molecules were probably forming through various processes. The chemistry needed for life was happening in countless pools and vents and droplets across the planet. The curtain was rising, slowly and softly, on the greatest performance in planetary history, the story of life itself. It would take another few 100 million years for life to definitively appear, but the Hadean had done its work. It had transformed a cloud of dust and gas into a rocky planet with oceans and atmosphere. It had created a dynamic environment where chemistry could explore possibilities. It had set the initial conditions from which everything else would follow. So rest with this image, a young planet, scarred by impacts but cooling, developing oceans and atmosphere, preparing for something unprecedented. The violence of the Hadean was necessary, in a way. It brought water, concentrated materials, created the fundamental structure of Earth. From this chaos, order would eventually emerge. From this lifeless chemistry, biology would somehow arise. The journey from stellar dust to living cells had begun, even if life itself was still waiting in the wings, gathering its molecules, preparing for its entrance. Now we move to one of science's most profound and beautiful mysteries. How did life begin? How did chemistry become biology? How did the non-living become living? Take a breath. Let these questions sit with you gently. We don't have complete answers, and perhaps that makes the story more wonderful, not less. Let's start with what we know. By about 3.8 to 4 billion years ago, Earth had liquid water, a solid crust, and a rich variety of chemical compounds. The atmosphere was still very different from today's. Little to no oxygen, lots of methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. But this primitive atmosphere wasn't a barrier to life. It was, in many ways, perfect for the chemistry that needed to happen. Life, as we understand it, requires several key ingredients. It needs liquid water. It needs a source of energy. It needs organic molecules, those containing carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and other elements. And it needs some way to store and pass on information. Early Earth had most of these ingredients. scattered across its surface, waiting to combine in just the right ways. Scientists have long debated where on early Earth life might have first emerged. Was it in shallow tidal pools, where cycles of wetting and drying could concentrate organic molecules? Was it in the open ocean? Was it in underground environments, protected from harmful radiation? Each hypothesis has its champions, its strengths, its elegant logic. One of the most fascinating possibilities involves hydrothermal vents deep in the ocean. Picture the seafloor, dark and quiet, far from sunlight. Here, volcanic activity heats water to extreme temperatures. This superheated water, rich in minerals dissolved from the rocks, comes gushing out of vents in the seafloor. Where this hot, chemical-rich water meets the cold ocean water, minerals precipitate out, forming chimney-like structures that can grow dozens of meters tall. These hydrothermal vents are remarkable places. They're full of chemical energy, created by the mixing of different chemical environments. They provide surfaces for molecules to stick to and interact. They create temperature gradients, hot near the vent, cool farther away, that can drive chemical reactions. And crucially, they're relatively protected from the harmful ultraviolet radiation that bathed Earth's surface back then, before an ozone layer existed to shield it. Modern hydrothermal vents teem with life, despite the extreme conditions. Organisms cluster around them, feeding on the chemical energy rather than sunlight. It's not hard to imagine that similar vents on early Earth could have been cradles for the first living things. Though, of course, imagining is not the same as knowing. Let that uncertainty rest softly. Science often works at the boundaries of what we can be certain about. In 1953, a young graduate student named Stanley Miller, working with his advisor Harold Urey, performed a famous experiment. They wanted to test whether organic molecules, the building blocks of life, could form spontaneously from simpler chemicals under early Earth conditions. They set up a closed system of glass flasks and tubes, filling them with water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, a mixture thought to represent early Earth's atmosphere. Then they added energy. They used electrical sparks to simulate lightning, which would have been common on early Earth with its active weather and volcanic activity. The sparks crackled through the gas mixture, driving chemical reactions. After just a week, Miller analyzed what had formed in the water. The results were remarkable. The experiment had produced amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, essential components of all life. This Miller-Urey experiment, as it came to be known, showed that organic molecules could form spontaneously from inorganic precursors under plausible early Earth conditions. It was a breakthrough, a demonstration that the chemistry of life wasn't impossibly unlikely. Though, as we've learned more, we now think early Earth's atmosphere was probably different from what Miller and Urey used. Less reducing, more carbon dioxide. But their fundamental insight remains. Organic molecules can form relatively easily under the right conditions. Since then, scientists have detected organic molecules in many places. They've been found in meteorites that fall to Earth, suggesting these building blocks are common in the universe. They've been detected in interstellar clouds, vast regions of space where stars are born. They've been created in laboratory experiments simulating various early Earth environments. The universe, it seems, is rather good at making the molecular pieces that life needs. It's the assembly of those pieces into something living that remains mysterious. So we have organic molecules forming on early Earth, amino acids, sugars, bases that would eventually become part of DNA and RNA, lipids that could form cell membranes. These molecules accumulated in Earth's oceans, creating what the scientist J.B.S. Haldane called a primordial soup, though later scientists sometimes prefer prebiotic broth, which sounds less like lunch and more scientific. But having ingredients doesn't give you a cake. You need them to come together in specific ways. Living things are characterized by several features that distinguish them from non-living chemistry. They're organized with structures and compartments. They can metabolize, taking in energy and materials and using them for their own purposes. They can reproduce, making copies of themselves. And they can evolve, changing over generations in response to their environment. The transition from non-living chemistry to the first living thing, a transition scientists call abiogenesis, remains one of the great unsolved puzzles in science. We don't know exactly how it happened. We probably can't ever know with certainty because we can't travel back 4 billion years to watch. But we can make educated guesses, follow the clues, build hypotheses, and test them. One key insight is that life probably didn't spring into existence all at once, fully formed. Instead, there was likely a gradual increase in complexity, a series of steps from simple chemistry to something we'd recognize as alive. Each step would have been relatively probable given the right conditions, but the combination of all the steps was nevertheless extraordinary. Some scientists think the first crucial step was the formation of self-replicating molecules. Imagine a molecule that could make copies of itself using raw materials from its environment. It doesn't need to be perfect at this. It just needs to be good enough that, on average, it makes more copies than it breaks down. Such a molecule would begin to spread, filling its environment with copies of itself. This is not yet life, but it's a step toward it. RNA, ribonucleic acid, is a particularly interesting candidate for early self-replicating molecules. RNA can both store information, like DNA, and catalyze chemical reactions, like proteins. This dual capability has led to what's called the RNA world hypothesis. According to this idea, before there was DNA or proteins, there was RNA, serving both functions. Early life might have been based entirely on RNA, with DNA and proteins coming later as evolution found more efficient solutions. We've even found, in laboratory experiments, that RNA molecules can evolve. If you create a population of RNA molecules and give them something to do, say, binding to a specific molecule, then allow them to replicate with some small errors, the population will gradually get better at the task. The more successful RNAs replicate more, the less successful ones replicate less. It's evolution in a test tube, remarkably simple, yet profound. But self-replicating molecules floating free in the ocean face a problem. Any useful molecules they produce will just drift away. There's no way to keep innovations concentrated, no way to build up a functioning system. This is where membranes come in. Certain types of molecules, particularly lipids, spontaneously form spherical structures called vesicles when placed in water. These vesicles create an inside and an outside, a boundary, a way to keep things together. If self-replicating molecules got enclosed in such vesicles, something magical could happen. Now their products wouldn't drift away. Chemical reactions could be coordinated. Different molecules could work together. The vesicle could grow by incorporating more lipids, eventually dividing into two vesicles, each containing copies of the original molecules. This is starting to look a bit like a cell, the fundamental unit of all life we know. There's something elegant about this progression, from simple molecules to more complex molecules, from free-floating chemistry to chemistry contained within membranes, from individual reactions to coordinated systems, from stability to self-replication to evolution. Each step builds on the last. Each makes the next more likely. It's a bit like walking up a gentle slope. You can't see the top from the bottom, but each step forward takes you higher. Of course, this is all somewhat speculative. We're describing a process that happened 4 billion years ago, long before any rocks survived to tell us what actually occurred. The evidence has been lost to time, metamorphosed, subducted into Earth's mantle, destroyed by geological processes. We're trying to solve a mystery where almost all the clues have been erased. And yet, we persist, using chemistry, geology, biology, and imagination to paint pictures of what might have been. What we can say with confidence is that by about 3.8 billion years ago, something we would recognize as life existed on Earth. We know this from several lines of evidence, though none is without controversy. In rocks from Greenland dated to 3.7 billion years ago, Scientists have found structures that look like stromatolites, layered formations created by mats of bacteria. In even older rocks, there are chemical signatures suggesting biological activity. These earliest organisms would have been simple, probably resembling modern bacteria in basic form. They were single-celled, lacking nuclei or other internal compartments we see in more complex cells. They were likely chemosynthetic, meaning they got their energy from chemical reactions rather than from sunlight. They lived in a world without oxygen, because oxygen was still billions of years away from becoming a major component of Earth's atmosphere. And they were the ancestors of everything that would come after. Every plant, every animal, every fungus, every microbe that has ever existed, all of them trace their lineage back to these earliest cells, whatever they were exactly. We're all family, separated by billions of years and countless generations, but connected by an unbroken chain of descent. Let that thought rest gently with you. You are related to the first spark of life that emerged in Earth's ancient oceans. For the next 1.5 billion years, let that sink in, 1.5 billion years, life remained simple. Single-celled organisms dominated Earth, invisible to any eye that might have looked, but reshaping the planet in profound ways. These were the prokaryotes, cells without nuclei. And they were busy. Let's talk about what prokaryotes are, gently and simply. Imagine the simplest living thing you can picture. Strip away all complexity. No brain, no organs, no tissues. Just a single cell, a tiny bag of chemistry floating in water. Inside this bag is genetic material, DNA, that carries instructions for making the cell's components. There are ribosomes for assembling proteins. There are various molecules floating around, doing the work of staying alive. And surrounding everything is a membrane, keeping the inside separate from the outside. That's a prokaryote. Simple, yes, but remarkably capable. These organisms can sense their environment, move toward food or away from danger, reproduce, evolve, and survive in conditions that would kill more complex life. They're living proof that you don't need complexity to be successful. Sometimes, simplicity is the most elegant solution. The prokaryotes fall into two major groups, bacteria and archaea. For a long time, scientists thought these were just one group, but molecular studies have revealed that bacteria and archaea are as different from each other as either is from us. They look similar under a microscope. Both are small, single-celled, without nuclei. But their biochemistry, the molecular details of how they operate, differs in fundamental ways. Bacteria are probably the most familiar prokaryotes. They're everywhere today, in soil, in water, on your skin, in your gut, floating in the air. Some cause disease, yes, but the vast majority are harmless or beneficial. They break down dead matter, recycle nutrients, fix nitrogen from the air, produce vitamins, and play countless other roles in Earth's ecosystems. Without bacteria, life as we know it would collapse. Archaea are less well known, but equally important. They were only recognized as a distinct group in 1977, when Carl Woese analyzed their RNA sequences and realized they were fundamentally different from bacteria. Many archaea live in extreme environments: hot springs, salt lakes, acidic pools, deep ocean vents. They're extremophiles, lovers of extremes. But they're also found in normal environments, including your own digestive system, where they produce methane as a byproduct of their metabolism. In the Archean Eon, which lasted from about 4 to 2.5 billion years ago, these prokaryotes had Earth to themselves. They diversified into countless varieties, each adapted to slightly different conditions. Some thrived in hot environments, others in cold. Some preferred acidic conditions, others alkaline. Some could use sulfur compounds for energy, others iron, others various organic molecules. Life was exploring the chemical possibilities, finding ways to extract energy from every available source. One group of bacteria made a discovery that would change everything. They evolved the ability to perform photosynthesis, to capture energy from sunlight, and use it to convert carbon dioxide and water into sugars and oxygen. Think about that for a moment. These bacteria learned to eat sunlight. They could take the most abundant resource in the solar system, light from the sun, and use it to power their metabolism. The earliest photosynthetic bacteria, which appeared perhaps 3.5 billion years ago, were probably similar to modern purple or green sulfur bacteria. They performed a simpler form of photosynthesis that didn't produce oxygen as a byproduct. But by about 2.7 to 2.8 billion years ago, a group called cyanobacteria had evolved a more sophisticated form of photosynthesis, one that split water molecules and released oxygen. Cyanobacteria are remarkable organisms. Under a microscope, they look simple, just small blue-green cells, sometimes forming chains or mats. But they contain chlorophyll, the same green pigment found in plants, and they photosynthesize in essentially the same way plants do. In fact, the chloroplasts in plant cells, the organelles where photosynthesis occurs, are descended from ancient cyanobacteria that were engulfed by early eukaryotic cells. But we're getting ahead of ourselves again. Slowly, softly, let's not rush. For hundreds of millions of years, cyanobacteria photosynthesized quietly, producing oxygen. At first, this oxygen didn't accumulate in the atmosphere. It reacted with iron dissolved in the oceans, forming iron oxide, rust, which precipitated out and settled on the seafloor. Today, these deposits form vast, banded iron formations, layers of iron-rich rock found around the world. They're beautiful in their own way, striped red and black, a record of oxygen accumulating in ancient seas. But eventually, all the dissolved iron was used up. The oxygen had nowhere to go but into the atmosphere. And that's when things got interesting, though we'll discuss it gently in the next section. For now, let's appreciate the invisible empire of prokaryotes, the first chapter in life's story on Earth. These organisms built structures called stromatolites, some of which still exist today. Stromatolites form when communities of bacteria, particularly cyanobacteria, grow in shallow water. The bacteria produce sticky substances that trap sediment. As the bacteria grow upward toward the light, they trap more sediment, building layer upon layer over time. The result is a mound or column of rock, with thin layers recording seasons or tides or other cycles. You can visit stromatolites today in certain places, like Shark Bay in Australia. Walking among these structures is like walking through a time machine. They look almost identical to stromatolites that formed 3 billion years ago. The process is the same. The organisms are similar. It's a connection to deep time, to the earliest era of life on Earth, existing right here in the present. During this long Archean era, continents were growing. Small proto-continents, cratons, were forming and colliding, building larger landmasses. But Earth would have looked alien to us. The sky was probably orange or pink due to methane haze in the atmosphere. There was no ozone layer, so harmful ultraviolet radiation bathed the surface. The moon loomed larger in the sky, creating enormous tides. The day was shorter, perhaps only 15 hours long, because Earth was spinning faster. Life stayed in the water, where it was protected from radiation. The land was barren, lifeless, a landscape of rock and chemical weathering and nothing more. No plants, no animals, no fungi, no lichens, just bare stone, volcanic ash, and the patient work of wind and water breaking it all down. Life hadn't yet found a way to leave the oceans, and it wouldn't for another 2 billion years. But in those oceans, hidden from any possible view, the prokaryotes were laying the groundwork for everything to come. They were perfecting metabolism, evolving genetic systems, developing sophisticated molecular machinery. They were proving that life, once started, was extraordinarily tenacious. They were filling every available ecological niche, adapting to every available condition, surviving through asteroid impacts and volcanic eruptions and whatever else the young Earth threw at them. You might think prokaryotic life is boring compared to what would come later, the towering trees, the soaring eagles, the thinking humans. But there's a beauty in simplicity, an elegance in efficiency. These organisms mastered the art of living with minimal complexity. They still outnumber all other life forms today. If you counted all the individual organisms on Earth, prokaryotes would comprise the vast majority. In terms of total biomass, they rival all plants. They are, in many ways, still Earth's most successful inhabitants. And they wait, floating in the back of your mind as you drift towards sleep, these ancient life forms that paved the way. Without their billions of years of patient evolution, we wouldn't be here. Every breath you take contains nitrogen fixed by bacteria. Your gut teems with bacteria helping digest your food. Your ancestors were once prokaryotes. In the unimaginably distant past, we carry their legacy in every cell of our bodies, in the very machinery of life itself. Here's where things get fascinating and a little bit catastrophic. Take a breath. Let it out slowly. The oxygen you just breathed in is the result of the most significant environmental change in Earth's history, an event so profound it nearly wiped out most life on the planet. And it was caused by life itself. We call it the Great Oxygenation Event, or sometimes the Great Oxidation Event, and it occurred roughly 2.4 billion years ago. Before this time, Earth's atmosphere contained almost no free oxygen. After it, oxygen began to accumulate, eventually reaching levels that would allow for more complex life forms. But the transition was anything but gentle. Remember those cyanobacteria we talked about, the ones that evolved oxygenic photosynthesis? They'd been producing oxygen for hundreds of millions of years, but that oxygen was being absorbed by chemical reactions, with iron in the oceans, with volcanic gases, with rocks exposed to weathering. As long as there were abundant oxygen sinks to absorb it, atmospheric oxygen levels stayed low, but eventually the sinks became saturated. The dissolved iron in the oceans was gone, precipitated out as rust. The easily oxidized rocks at the surface had all been oxidized. Oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere, slowly at first, then more rapidly. By about 2.4 billion years ago, oxygen levels had risen to perhaps 1 to 2% of atmospheric composition, compared to about 21% today. That might not sound like much, but it was revolutionary. Here's the thing about oxygen. It's poisonous to many organisms. It's highly reactive, stealing electrons from other molecules, disrupting chemical processes. For organisms that had evolved in an oxygen-free world, this new oxygen-rich environment was catastrophic. It's a bit like if your room suddenly filled with chlorine gas, your environment becoming toxic almost overnight, in geological terms. Many prokaryotes that couldn't handle oxygen went extinct. Others retreated to oxygen-free environments, deep sediments, oxygen-depleted waters, the guts of other organisms, where they persist to this day. Some organisms evolved defenses against oxygen, developing enzymes that could neutralize its damaging effects. A few even figured out how to use oxygen to their advantage, evolving aerobic respiration, a way of metabolism that uses oxygen to break down food molecules and produces far more energy than anaerobic processes. This was, quite possibly, the first mass extinction event in Earth's history, not caused by asteroids or volcanism or climate change, but by life itself, by the accumulated byproduct of photosynthesis. Life had polluted its own environment, creating a crisis that reshaped the biosphere. It's a sobering reminder that organisms don't always exist in harmony with their environment. Sometimes they change it dramatically, even catastrophically. But from this catastrophe came opportunity. Oxygen opened up new possibilities. It allowed for more energetic metabolism. It enabled larger, more complex organisms to eventually evolve. It led to the formation of an ozone layer, which would eventually shield Earth's surface from harmful ultraviolet radiation, making the land habitable. The Great Oxygenation Event was devastating for many life forms, but it set the stage for everything that would come after. There's evidence that the oxygenation happened in pulses, not as a single smooth increase. Oxygen levels rose, then fell, then rose again. This makes sense. Ecosystems are complex. and changes don't happen in straight lines. Perhaps oxygen levels would rise when cyanobacteria were thriving, then fall when something disrupted their populations. Perhaps geological processes would alternate between releasing and absorbing oxygen. The details remain somewhat mysterious, hidden in the chemical signatures of ancient rocks. One particularly intriguing piece of evidence comes from sulfur isotopes. Sulfur exists in several stable forms, or isotopes, with different numbers of neutrons. When ultraviolet light hits sulfur compounds in an oxygen-poor atmosphere, it creates a distinctive pattern in the ratios of these isotopes. This pattern shows up in rocks older than 2.4 billion years, but disappears in younger rocks. The interpretation is that before 2.4 billion years ago, UV light was reaching Earth's surface and affecting sulfur compounds. After that time, enough oxygen had accumulated to form an ozone layer, which blocked the UV light. It's detective work of the most elegant kind, reading Earth's history from subtle chemical clues. The Great Oxygenation Event also affected the climate. Methane, which had been abundant in the early atmosphere, is broken down by oxygen. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, so its removal would have cooled the planet, and cool it did. Around 2.4 billion years ago, Earth experienced what's called the Huronian glaciation, one of the longest ice ages in our planet's history. Ice sheets may have covered much of the planet, possibly even reaching the equator. Some scientists call this a snowball Earth event, though the evidence remains debated. Imagine softly an Earth encased in ice, white glaciers stretching from pole to pole, frozen oceans, life persisting only in refugia, pockets of liquid water in hot springs, under ice, in the deep ocean where volcanic heat provided warmth. It's a stark image, a planet transformed by the byproducts of photosynthesis into a frozen wasteland. And yet, life endured. It always does, somehow. The Huronian glaciation eventually ended, probably due to the accumulation of carbon dioxide from volcanic activity. With the surface frozen, weathering processes that normally remove CO2 from the atmosphere would have slowed down. Volcanoes kept adding CO2, creating a greenhouse effect that eventually warmed the planet, enough to melt the ice. Earth emerged from its frozen state, perhaps over tens of millions of years, returning to more temperate conditions. After the Great Oxygenation Event, oxygen levels remained relatively low and stable for the next billion years or so. They probably hovered around 1 to 10% of atmospheric composition, enough to be significant but not yet at modern levels. This was sufficient for the evolution of aerobic respiration, but not yet enough for large, active organisms. Life remained primarily microbial, though with greater diversity than before. One interesting consequence of oxygen in the atmosphere was the formation of new types of minerals. Oxygen reacts with various elements to form oxides, and many of these oxides are minerals we're familiar with today. Before the Great Oxygenation Event, Earth had perhaps 1,500 different mineral species. After it, the number increased dramatically. Today, Earth has over 5,000 mineral species, and many of these owe their existence to the presence of oxygen. Our planet's very rocks bear the signature of life's influence. There's something almost poetic about this. Life didn't just adapt to Earth's environment, it transformed that environment, creating conditions that would allow more complex life to evolve. The cyanobacteria that first produced oxygen were changing not just the atmosphere, but the oceans, the rocks, the climate, everything. They were environmental engineers on a planetary scale, working slowly over millions of years, with no awareness of what they were accomplishing. Just photosynthesizing, growing, reproducing, following the simple imperative of life to continue. And in doing so, they made the world ready for what would come next. The stage was set, the conditions established. Oxygen was available, energy was abundant. The foundations were in place for life to make its next great leap. The evolution of complex cells, cells with nuclei and internal structures, cells that would eventually give rise to all the visible life we see around us today. But that's a story for the next section. For now, rest with the image of early Earth, slowly turning from red to blue, as oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere. Breathe deeply, that oxygen the gift of ancient microbes, and let yourself drift. Now we arrive at one of evolution's most profound innovations, a development so significant that it defines the boundary between simple and complex life. We're talking about the evolution of eukaryotic cells, cells with nuclei. This is where life began its journey toward the multicellular, the visible, the diverse world we inhabit today. Let's pause for a moment and consider what makes eukaryotic cells different from the prokaryotic cells we've been discussing. The most obvious difference is the nucleus, a membrane-bound compartment that houses the cell's DNA. But that's just the beginning. Eukaryotic cells are filled with membrane-bound organelles, mitochondria for energy production, chloroplasts for photosynthesis in plants and algae, endoplasmic reticulum for protein and lipid synthesis, Golgi apparatus for processing and packaging molecules, and various other specialized structures. It's like comparing a simple room to an entire house with separate chambers for different activities. Eukaryotic cells are also generally much larger than prokaryotic cells, often 10 to 100 times bigger in volume. This size difference matters. A larger cell can contain more complexity, can coordinate more processes, can do more things. But size comes with challenges. How do you move materials around in a larger space? How do you coordinate activities in different parts of the cell? The compartmentalization provided by internal membranes is part of the solution. The origin of eukaryotic cells is thought to have occurred somewhere between 1.6 and 2.1 billion years ago, though the exact timing remains uncertain. What we do know is that it fundamentally involved one of the most remarkable events in evolutionary history: endosymbiosis. Let that word settle gently. Endosymbiosis means living together inside, and it describes what happened when one cell engulfed another, and instead of digesting it, kept it alive as a resident, a partner, a permanent guest. Here's the story, as best we understand it. At some point in Earth's history, a prokaryotic cell, probably an archaeon, engulfed a bacterium. Perhaps it was trying to eat it, or perhaps the bacterium invaded. Either way, the bacterium ended up inside the larger cell. Normally, this would end badly for the bacterium, broken down and digested. But in this case, something different happened. The bacterium survived. It continued living, reproducing inside its host cell. And then the two made a deal, though not consciously, of course. The bacterium, which was capable of aerobic respiration, produced energy efficiently using oxygen. It shared this energy with the host cell, providing ATP, the universal energy currency of life. In return, the host cell provided protection, resources, a stable environment. Both benefited from the arrangement. Over time, the relationship became permanent, essential. The bacterium could no longer survive outside the host, and the host could no longer survive without the bacterium's energy production. That ancient bacterium became the mitochondria, the powerhouses of modern eukaryotic cells. Every mitochondrion in every eukaryotic cell, from yeast to humans, is descended from that original bacterial endosymbiont. It's a beautiful example of cooperation shaping evolution, of competition giving way to partnership. And we know it happened because mitochondria still bear the signatures of their bacterial ancestry. Mitochondria have their own DNA, separate from the cell's nuclear DNA. This mitochondrial DNA is circular, like bacterial DNA, and much smaller than nuclear DNA. Mitochondria also have their own ribosomes, which are more similar to bacterial ribosomes than to eukaryotic ribosomes. They reproduce by dividing, like bacteria, and their membranes contain proteins that are characteristically bacterial. All of this evidence points to their origin as once independent bacteria that took up residence inside another cell. In organisms that photosynthesize, plants, algae, and some protists, a second endosymbiotic event occurred. A cyanobacterium was engulfed and became the chloroplast, the organelle where photosynthesis happens. Like mitochondria, chloroplasts have their own DNA, their own ribosomes, and they reproduce by division. They're descendants of free-living cyanobacteria, now permanent residents in plant cells, capturing sunlight and producing sugars. It's rather remarkable when you think about it. The cells that make up your body contain the descendants of ancient bacteria, now so integrated that they can't exist independently. You're not just one organism. You're a community, a collective, a collaboration between different lineages that merged billions of years ago. Each of your cells is a testament to the power of symbiosis, of cooperation, of finding ways to work together. The evolution of eukaryotic cells opened up new possibilities. With more energy available from mitochondria, cells could grow larger. With compartmentalization, they could keep different processes separate, preventing interference. With a nucleus protecting the DNA, they could develop more sophisticated genetic systems, with more complex regulation of gene expression. All of this set the stage for the next major transition, multicellularity. But before we get there, let's spend a moment appreciating the single-celled eukaryotes, the protists. This is a diverse group: amoebas, paramecia, algae, and countless others. Some are predators, hunting and engulfing bacteria or other protists. Some are photosynthetic, using chloroplasts to harvest sunlight. Some are decomposers, breaking down dead organic matter. They live in every aquatic environment: oceans, lakes, rivers, puddles, even the water film on soil particles. Under a microscope, protists are gorgeous. An amoeba flows like liquid, extending pseudopods, temporary feet of cytoplasm, to move and capture food. A paramecium glides through water, covered in thousands of tiny hair-like cilia, beating in coordinated waves. A diatom, a type of algae, lives inside an intricately patterned glass shell, like a jewel box crafted by nature. These organisms show the incredible diversity that can exist at the microscopic scale, invisible to our eyes, but teeming with life and activity. Some protists formed colonies, groups of cells living together. These weren't truly multicellular, because each cell remained essentially independent, capable of surviving on its own. But colonial living offered advantages. A colony could be larger, harder for predators to eat. Different cells in the colony could specialize slightly, some focusing on movement, others on feeding. It was a hint of what was to come, a transitional form between single-celled and multicellular life. The Proterozoic eon, lasting from 2.5 billion to 541 million years ago, was the age of eukaryotes. For over 1.5 billion years, they diversified, evolved, explored the possibilities of their new cellular organization. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere gradually increased, reaching perhaps 10–15% by the end of the Proterozoic. Continents continued to form and break apart through plate tectonics. Ice ages came and went, including possible snowball Earth events around 700 million years ago. And somewhere in this vast span of time, some protists made a crucial transition. They stopped being colonial and became truly multicellular, with cells specializing into different types, cooperating so intimately that they couldn't survive independently. This transition happened multiple times in different lineages. Animals evolved multicellularity separately from plants, which evolved it separately from fungi. But once it happened, it unleashed a new wave of evolutionary innovation. Multicellular organisms could be large, could develop specialized tissues and organs, could occupy ecological niches impossible for single cells. A multicellular organism could have cells dedicated to movement, others to digestion, others to reproduction, others to sensing the environment. Division of labor allowed for greater efficiency, greater capability, greater complexity. It was life's way of scaling up, of becoming visible, of beginning to shape ecosystems in new ways. The earliest multicellular fossils are difficult to interpret because they're simple, and could potentially be colonies rather than true multicellular organisms. But by about 600 million years ago, we have clear evidence of multicellular animals. These were the Ediacaran organisms, named after the Ediacara Hills in Australia, where many were first discovered. They're strange, unfamiliar creatures, looking like fronds, discs, and quilted mattresses. Many were soft-bodied, without hard parts, preserved only in certain conditions where their impressions were captured in fine sediment. The Ediacarans are mysterious. Some were probably early animals. Others might have been fungi or even strange evolutionary experiments that left no descendants. They lived in the late Proterozoic, just before the great explosion of animal diversity that would mark the beginning of the next era. They give us a glimpse of life on the brink of a revolution, poised to transform in ways that would fill the oceans with an astonishing variety of forms. As you lie there, consider this slow unfolding of complexity, from simple cells to complex cells, from solitary cells to cooperative colonies, from colonies to true multicellular organisms. Each transition took millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of years. Evolution works patiently, trying variations, keeping what works, discarding what doesn't. It's not rushing toward any goal. It's simply exploring possibilities, one generation at a time. Your own body carries the legacy of these ancient transitions. Every cell contains mitochondria descended from bacteria. Your DNA is protected in a nucleus inherited from the first eukaryotes. You're multicellular, with trillions of cells working together, descended from organisms that first figured out this trick hundreds of millions of years ago. The history of life is written in your very structure if you know how to read it. Something extraordinary happened about 541 million years ago at the beginning of a geological period called the Cambrian, in what is, by geological standards, a remarkably short time, perhaps just 10 to 20 million years. Most of the major groups of animals we know today appeared in the fossil record. Paleontologists call it the Cambrian explosion, and it represents one of the most significant events in the history of life. Before the Cambrian, animal life was relatively simple. The Ediacaran organisms we mentioned were soft-bodied, generally immobile or slow-moving, living on or in sediment. They were pioneers, the first experiments in large multicellular animal life. But during the Cambrian, something changed dramatically. The fossil record suddenly fills with animals bearing hard parts, shells, exoskeletons, spines, and teeth. Animals developed complex eyes, sophisticated nervous systems, active predation, and diverse body plans. Why did this happen? What triggered this explosion of diversity? Scientists have proposed many explanations, and the truth probably involves several factors working together. Let's explore them gently, one at a time. First, oxygen levels had risen to a threshold that could support larger, more active organisms. Remember, active movement requires energy, and aerobic respiration provides much more energy than anaerobic processes. With atmospheric oxygen perhaps reaching 15 to 20% of modern levels, animals could afford to be bigger, more muscular, more metabolically active. This opened up new possibilities for lifestyle and body structure. Second, the evolution of predation created an evolutionary arms race. Once some animals started eating other animals, prey species needed defenses. Hard shells provided protection. The ability to burrow into sediment offered escape. Better sensory systems, eyes, chemical detection, allowed prey to detect predators. And as prey evolved defenses, predators evolved better ways to overcome them. This back and forth drove rapid innovation in both groups. Third, genetic tools for building complex body plans had evolved. Animals possess a set of genes called Hox genes that control body segmentation and structure during development. These genes act like architects, determining where different body parts form. By the Cambrian, these genetic tools were in place, allowing evolution to experiment with radically different body plans. Once you have the genetic toolkit for making a complex body, evolution can play with the designs. Fourth, empty ecological niches abounded. The world was relatively unpopulated. There was space for new lifestyles, new ways of making a living. Early Cambrian animals were pioneers, colonizing open territory, trying out different strategies without much competition. As in any frontier, diversity flourished. The Cambrian seas would have looked alien to us, though fascinating. Swimming through them, you might encounter trilobites, arthropods with segmented bodies and multiple legs, distant relatives of modern insects, spiders, and crustaceans. Trilobites were incredibly successful, diversifying into thousands of species over the next 270 million years. Some were predators, some scavenged, some filtered food from the water. They had compound eyes, sometimes with hundreds of lenses, allowing them to see with remarkable clarity. You'd also find anomalocarids, strange predators that could grow up to a meter long, giants by the standards of their time. They had circular mouths ringed with plates, grasping appendages for capturing prey, and they swam by undulating lobes along their sides. They look like nothing alive today, embodying the experimental nature of Cambrian life, where evolution was still working out viable designs. There were creatures that looked like tiny vacuum cleaners, sweeping the seafloor for food particles. Others that resembled ornate chandeliers, extending feeding structures into the water column. Some had 5 eyes. Others had armor plating. There were worms that lived in tubes, sponges that filtered water, early mollusks experimenting with shell designs. The diversity was staggering, the creativity of evolution on full display. One particularly famous site for Cambrian fossils is the Burgess Shale in Canada. This deposit, formed about 508 million years ago, preserves not just hard parts, but also soft tissues, giving us an extraordinarily detailed view of Cambrian life. The fossils are so well preserved that scientists can see gills, guts, muscles, even the last meals in some animals' digestive systems. It's a window into a lost world, frozen in stone, waiting 500 million years for humans to find it and marvel. Among the Burgess Shale fossils is a creature called Picaia, a small eel-like animal with a notochord, a flexible rod running along its back. This seemingly minor feature is profoundly significant because the notochord is the defining characteristic of chordates, the group that includes all vertebrates, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Picaia might have been one of our very distant ancestors, swimming in Cambrian seas, unremarkable among the diversity around it, yet carrying the potential for all vertebrate life to come. The Cambrian explosion wasn't just about animals, though that's where the most obvious changes occurred. Algae diversified, creating the base of marine food webs. Bacteria and archaea continued their invisible dominance, cycling nutrients, producing oxygen, decomposing dead matter. Fungi may have already been present, though their fossil record is sparse. Life was becoming more interconnected, more complex as an ecosystem, not just as individual organisms. It's worth noting that the Cambrian explosion was an explosion only in geological terms. 10 to 20 million years is slow by human standards, unimaginably slow. It represents perhaps 100 million generations for small marine animals. There was plenty of time for evolution to work, to try variations, to refine designs. What appears sudden in the rock record was gradual to the organisms living through it. But from our perspective, looking back across 500 million years, it does appear explosive. The difference between late Proterozoic fossils and Middle Cambrian fossils is dramatic. Simple, strange Ediacaran organisms give way to recognizable animal groups with sophisticated features. It's as if life suddenly learned how to be complex, how to build bodies with multiple interacting parts, how to occupy dozens of different ecological roles. There's something deeply satisfying about the Cambrian. It's when animal life, as we know it, begins, when the major blueprints for animal bodies were established. Almost every animal alive today, from ants to elephants, from starfish to humans, can trace its basic body plan back to the Cambrian. We're all variations on themes that were established in those ancient seas, and yet Many Cambrian experiments didn't persist. Some body plans that were common then have no living representatives. Evolution tried them, found them wanting or simply unlucky, and they disappeared in subsequent extinctions. The Cambrian was a time of both explosive creativity and ruthless selection, life experimenting wildly while reality quietly determined what would survive. As the Cambrian period gave way to the Ordovician around 485 million years ago, life continued to diversify. Jawless fish appeared, the first vertebrates to become common in the fossil record. Reefs formed, built by various organisms including early corals and algae. The continents were still mostly barren, but life was preparing for its next great adventure, the colonization of land. That story, however, will wait for us just a little further ahead. For now, let yourself drift through Cambrian seas, imagining trilobites scuttling across the seafloor, anomalocarids hunting in open water, strange creatures with bizarre body plans living out their existence in an ancient ocean. The water is clear, the sun filters down from above, and life, finally visible, finally diverse, fills every available space with its endless creativity. It's a good image to carry into dreams, this ancient ocean teeming with the ancestors of everything that would come later, including you. Imagine Earth 470 million years ago. The oceans are full of life, fish, arthropods, mollusks, all manner of marine organisms. But the continents are barren. Stone and sand stretch from coast to interior, weathered by wind and rain but lifeless. No green, no movement, no sound except wind and water and the occasional rumble of volcanic activity. It's a landscape that would feel profoundly empty to us, alien despite being our own planet. This barren landscape was about to change. Life was preparing to make one of its most significant transitions, from water to land. This wasn't easy. Land presents challenges that water doesn't. In water, you're supported by buoyancy. On land, you need structural support against gravity. In water, there's no danger of drying out. On land, desiccation is a constant threat. In water, reproduction can happen through simply releasing eggs and sperm. On land, you need strategies to prevent your offspring from drying out. But land also offers opportunities. Sunlight is more intense at the surface than underwater. Carbon dioxide is more available in air than dissolved in water, and there's space, vast expanses of unoccupied territory, free from competition and predation. For organisms that could solve the challenges, land was an open frontier. Plants likely began the transition. We say likely because the early fossil record is sparse, and there's still debate about the exact sequence of events. But by about 470 million years ago, we have evidence of plant spores on land, suggesting that simple plants, probably similar to modern liverworts or mosses, had established themselves in moist environments near water. These early land plants were small, simple, lacking true roots, stems, and leaves. They probably looked like green mats clinging to damp rocks, growing in thin soil formed from weathered rock and accumulated organic matter. They reproduced through spores, like modern mosses, which require moisture for the sperm to swim to the egg. They had to stay close to water, venturing only into environments that stayed moist most of the time. But even these simple plants had profound effects. Their presence changed weathering processes, as roots, once they evolved, broke apart rock more effectively. Dead plant matter accumulated, forming the beginnings of true soil. This soil could hold water, creating moisture conditions that allowed more plants to colonize. It's a positive feedback loop. Plants create conditions that allow more plants, which create even better conditions. By the Silurian period, around 440 to 420 million years ago, more sophisticated plants had evolved. These early vascular plants possessed specialized tissues for transporting water and nutrients throughout their bodies. This allowed them to grow taller, to venture farther from water sources, to occupy a wider range of environments. Cooksonia, one of the earliest and best-known vascular plants, stood just a few centimeters tall, with simple branching stems topped by spore-producing structures. Tiny by our standards, but revolutionary for its time. Following the plants came the arthropods. Millipedes and centipedes were among the first land animals, crawling through the primitive vegetation, feeding on decaying plant matter, or on each other. These early arthropods had exoskeletons that prevented water loss, and jointed legs that could support them against gravity, pre-adaptations from their aquatic ancestors that happened to work well on land too. Imagine walking through a Silurian landscape. The ground is covered with low-growing plants, none taller than your knees. The only animals visible are small arthropods scuttling through the vegetation. It's quiet except for wind and the rustle of plant material. No flowers, no tree trunks, no bird songs, no insect buzzing. The sun shines down on a world that's just beginning to be green, just starting to come alive. The Devonian period, from 419 to 359 million years ago, is sometimes called the Age of Fishes because of the tremendous diversification of fish in the oceans. But it was also a crucial time for life on land. Plants evolved into trees, creating the first forests. Archaeopteris, one of the earliest tree-like plants, could grow up to 30 meters tall, with a trunk, branches, and a spreading crown. True forests emerged, casting shade, creating new habitats, fundamentally altering landscapes. These forests were different from modern ones. There were no flowering plants yet, no deciduous trees with leaves that change color and fall. Instead, there were ferns, horsetails, and early seed plants. The trees reproduced through spores or primitive seeds. The understory was filled with ferns and smaller plants. It would have looked lush and green, but strange, with unfamiliar forms and proportions. Insects appeared and diversified rapidly. Some became herbivores, feeding on the abundant plant life. Others became predators, hunting the herbivores. Still others became detritivores, consuming dead plant matter. Flight evolved in insects, opening up the three-dimensional space above ground. Dragonflies with wingspans up to 70 centimeters patrolled Devonian skies. Giants compared to modern dragonflies, taking advantage of the higher oxygen levels of the time. And then came vertebrates. The first tetrapods, four-legged vertebrates, evolved from lobe-finned fish during the late Devonian, around 370 million years ago. These early tetrapods, like Tiktaalik and Acanthostega, were still tied to water, living in shallow wetlands and streams. They had 4 limbs with digits, but they used them for moving through shallow water and mudflats, rather than for walking on truly dry land. Tiktaalik is particularly fascinating because it beautifully illustrates the transition from fish to tetrapod. It had scales and fins like a fish, but also a neck that could move independently of its body, a flat head with eyes on top rather than on the sides, and fin bones that resemble the bones in tetrapod limbs. It's a mosaic of features, an organism caught mid-transition, perfectly adapted to its environment, but also carrying hints of what would come. The evolution of tetrapods was driven by several factors. Shallow water environments, swamps, floodplains, seasonal pools were common in the Devonian. These could become oxygen depleted, making it advantageous to breathe air. Limbs were useful for pushing through vegetation and mud, for moving between pools when some dried up. Over time, some tetrapods became less dependent on water, evolving thicker skin to resist desiccation, more efficient lungs for breathing air, and stronger limbs for supporting their weight on land. By the Carboniferous period, 359 to 299 million years ago, land ecosystems had become complex and diverse. This was the age of great coal forests, vast swamps filled with towering trees like Lepidodendron and Sigillaria. These were scale trees, not closely related to modern trees, with bark marked by diamond-shaped patterns. They could grow up to 30 or 40 meters tall, creating dense canopies. The climate was warm and humid, perfect for plant growth. Dead plant material accumulated faster than it could decompose, eventually forming the vast coal deposits that give the period its name. Walking through a Carboniferous forest would feel like walking through a greenhouse, humid and lush, with ferns as ground cover, scale trees forming the canopy, and a diversity of insects and other arthropods everywhere. Among those arthropods were some true giants. Arthropleura, a relative of millipedes, could grow up to 2.6 meters long, the length of a large person lying down. Meganeura, a dragonfly relative, had a wingspan of about 70 centimeters. These giant arthropods were possible partly because of high oxygen levels, which in the Carboniferous reached about 35% of the atmosphere compared to 21% today. More oxygen meant more efficient respiration, allowing larger body sizes despite the limitations of arthropod breathing systems. Amphibians diversified extensively during the Carboniferous. Some remained small and salamander-like. Others grew large, with crocodile-like forms that hunted in water and on land. But they were still tied to water for reproduction, needing moist environments for their eggs and aquatic larval stages. The truly revolutionary step, complete independence from water, would require a new innovation: the amniotic egg. The amniotic egg appeared in the late Carboniferous in a group of tetrapods that would give rise to all reptiles, birds, and mammals. This egg, encased in a protective shell with internal membranes that prevented desiccation, allowed reproduction to occur away from water. It was a key innovation, breaking the last major constraint tying vertebrates to aquatic environments. With the amniotic egg, vertebrates could truly conquer the land, moving into dry habitats, radiating into deserts and mountains and everywhere in between. Let yourself rest with this image. A world transforming from barren stone to green forest, from empty landscapes to ecosystems, teeming with life. Plants pioneering the land, creating soil, building forests. Arthropods following, then vertebrates, each group solving the challenges of terrestrial life in their own ways. It took millions of years, countless small adaptations, but life did it. Life found a way, as it always does, patient and persistent, and endlessly creative. Section 8. The Age of Reptiles, Dinosaurs and Their World. Now we enter one of the most celebrated chapters in life's history, the Age of Reptiles, the time when dinosaurs walked the earth. But let's approach this slowly, gently, starting not with the dinosaurs themselves, but with the world that gave rise to them. The Permian period, from 299 to 252 million years ago, saw reptiles become the dominant land vertebrates. Early reptiles diversified into many forms, some small and lizard-like, others large and sprawling, still others developing mammal-like characteristics. One group, the synapsids, eventually gave rise to mammals, though that wouldn't happen for tens of millions of years. Another group, the diapsids, would eventually give rise to dinosaurs and birds. The continents during this time were assembled into a single supercontinent called Pangaea. All of Earth's landmass was connected, stretching from pole to pole. The interior of Pangaea was far from oceans, creating vast arid regions, deserts larger than any today. Climate zones were extreme, hot, dry interiors, and more temperate coastal regions. Life had to adapt to these conditions, evolving strategies for conserving water, dealing with temperature extremes, and surviving seasonal droughts. And then came catastrophe. At the end of the Permian, 252 million years ago, Earth experienced the most severe mass extinction event in its history. We call it the Permian-Triassic extinction, or sometimes the Great Dying, and it wiped out approximately 90 to 95% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. It was devastating beyond anything before or since. What caused it? The evidence points to massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. These weren't ordinary eruptions, but flood basalts, vast outpourings of lava covering enormous areas. The Siberian traps, as they're called, released not just lava, but enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. This triggered a cascade of environmental changes: global warming, ocean acidification, acid rain, and possibly the release of methane from seafloor deposits, amplifying the warming further. The oceans became oxygen depleted. The combination of warming and chemical changes killed most marine life. On land, the warming, acid rain, and disrupted climate patterns led to widespread ecosystem collapse. The fossil record shows the sudden disappearance of most species, replaced by a long period of low diversity, often called a dead zone, where life struggled to recover. But recover it did, slowly. The Triassic period, from 252 to 201 million years ago, saw life gradually rebuilding from the Permian extinction. New groups of organisms evolved to fill empty ecological niches. Among them were the first dinosaurs, appearing around 230 million years ago in the late Triassic. The earliest dinosaurs were small, bipedal predators and omnivores. They walked on two legs, had grasping hands, and were probably quick and agile. They weren't immediately dominant. They shared their world with other reptile groups, some of which were quite large and successful. But dinosaurs had certain advantages. They were efficient walkers, with legs held directly under their bodies rather than sprawled out to the sides. They had sophisticated jaws and teeth, and they may have been more intelligent than other reptiles of their time. Another mass extinction, at the end of the Triassic, probably also caused by volcanic activity, eliminated many of the dinosaurs' competitors. This cleared the way for dinosaurs to diversify and become the dominant land animals, a position they would hold for the next 135 million years. The Jurassic period, from 201 to 145 million years ago, is when dinosaurs truly flourished. This is the era that captures our imagination, when giants walked the earth. Long-necked sauropods like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus browsed on tall trees, their massive bodies supported by columnar legs. Predators like Allosaurus hunted in forests and plains. Stegosaurus bore plates along its back, whose function, display, temperature regulation, protection, scientists still debate. The world of the Jurassic was warm and moist. Pangaea was beginning to break apart, with the Atlantic Ocean starting to form as a narrow seaway between the Americas and Africa, Europe. Sea levels were high, creating shallow inland seas and coastal environments. Forests were lush, dominated by conifers, ginkgos, ferns, and cycads. There were still no flowering plants, those would come later, but there was abundant vegetation to support the massive herbivores. Flying reptiles, the pterosaurs, soared through Jurassic skies. Some were small, sparrow-sized. Others grew to enormous sizes, with wingspans up to 10 meters or more. They had hollow bones for lightness, large brains for processing visual information, and wings formed by membranes stretching from elongated fourth fingers to their bodies and hind limbs. They were successful and diverse, occupying ecological niches that today are filled by birds. And speaking of birds, they evolved during the Jurassic from small theropod dinosaurs. The famous fossil Archaeopteryx, discovered in Germany and dated to about 150 million years ago, beautifully illustrates this transition. It had feathers and wings like a bird, but also teeth, claws on its wings, and a long bony tail, like a reptile. It's a mosaic, like Tiktaalik before it, showing evolution in progress, one group transitioning into another. Feathers probably evolved first for insulation, not flight. Many non-flying dinosaurs had feathers, especially small theropods. These feathers provided warmth, and in many cases, they were used for display, with bright colors and patterns used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Flight came later, perhaps evolving from gliding, which itself might have evolved from running and jumping, to catch prey or escape predators. The details remain debated, but the general picture is clear. Birds are dinosaurs, modified for flight, carrying on the dinosaur lineage to this day. The Cretaceous period, from 145 to 66 million years ago, saw dinosaurs reach their peak diversity. This was the age of Tyrannosaurus rex, the fearsome predator with bone-crushing jaws, of Triceratops, with its 3 horns and massive frill, of hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs that thrived in vast herds, of the massive titanosaurs, sauropods that could weigh up to 70 or even 100 tons. Flowering plants, angiosperms, appeared and diversified during the Cretaceous, fundamentally changing terrestrial ecosystems. Unlike earlier plants that relied on wind or water for reproduction, flowering plants recruited animals as pollinators, offering nectar and other rewards in exchange for pollen transport. This created new relationships, new dependencies, new evolutionary pressures. Insects co-evolved with flowers, developing specialized mouthparts for accessing nectar, keen vision for finding flowers, and in many cases, close partnerships with specific plant species. The world was warm, with no ice at the poles. Forests extended far into what are now Arctic regions. Sea levels were high, creating extensive shallow seas that covered parts of continents. Marine reptiles, plesiosaurs, mosasaurs and others, ruled the oceans, hunting fish and other prey. Life was diverse, successful, seemingly secure in its patterns. And then, 66 million years ago, came another catastrophe. An asteroid, perhaps 10 kilometers in diameter, struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs. It excavated a crater 180 kilometers across. It sent a shockwave circling the planet multiple times. Ejecta, molten rock, vaporized material, rained down, starting wildfires across vast areas. Dust and aerosols filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight. The immediate effects were devastating, but the longer-term consequences were worse. Without sunlight, photosynthesis stopped. Plants died. Herbivores starved. Predators followed. Food chains collapsed. Temperatures plummeted as the dust blocked sunlight, an impact winter that could have lasted years. When the dust finally settled, the greenhouse gases released by the impact caused severe global warming. The combination of rapid cooling, then rapid warming with ecosystem collapse in between was too much for most species. About 75% of all species went extinct in this event, known as the Cretaceous-Paleogene (KPG) extinction. All non-avian dinosaurs died out, pterosaurs disappeared, marine reptiles vanished. Many plants and animals at all levels went extinct. The Mesozoic era, the age of reptiles, came to an abrupt end. But life persisted, as it always does. Small mammals that could shelter underground, that needed less food, that could eat a variety of things. They survived. Birds survived, descended from their dinosaur ancestors. Crocodiles and turtles, able to endure harsh conditions, made it through. From these survivors, life would rebuild, diversify again, create new ecosystems. The age of dinosaurs was over, but Earth's story continued, and a new chapter was beginning, the age of mammals, which includes our own emergence, much later, after many more twists in evolution's long and winding path. Rest with these images: giants walking through ancient forests, pterosaurs soaring overhead, the world warm and green. Then, in an instant, catastrophe, darkness, cold, extinction, and finally, slowly, recovery. New life emerging from the survivors, the resilience of life asserting itself once more. It's a story of both fragility and endurance, of how life can dominate for millions of years and yet be swept away by chance, by events beyond any organism's control. In the aftermath of the KPG extinction, with the dinosaurs gone and ecosystems shattered, mammals began their ascent. They'd been present for over 160 million years, living quietly in the shadows of the dinosaurs, but now they had their chance. The stage was empty, the roles were open, and mammals, versatile and adaptable, would fill them in ways both familiar and surprising. Let's step back for a moment and appreciate what makes mammals distinctive. We're warm-blooded, maintaining constant body temperatures through internal metabolism. We have hair or fur for insulation. We produce milk to feed our young, nurturing them through a vulnerable period of growth. We have specialized teeth for different functions: cutting, tearing, grinding. Most mammals give birth to live young rather than laying eggs, though a few primitive species still lay eggs. And we have relatively large brains compared to body size, allowing for complex behavior and learning. These characteristics evolved gradually during the Mesozoic, in mammals' ancestors and early mammals themselves. The synapsids we mentioned earlier, the mammal-like reptiles of the Permian and Triassic, showed increasing mammalian features over time. By the Jurassic, true mammals had appeared. Small, mostly nocturnal creatures that hunted insects and scurried through the underbrush while dinosaurs dominated the daylight world. Being small had advantages in this world. Small animals need less food. They can hide more easily. They can exploit niches that large animals ignore: holes in trees, spaces, under logs, burrows underground. During the Mesozoic, mammals perfected the art of being small and unobtrusive. They developed keen hearing for hunting at night, enhanced sense of smell for finding food and detecting danger, whiskers for navigating in darkness. These adaptations, originally for surviving alongside dinosaurs, would later prove valuable in the world after the dinosaurs were gone. After the KPG extinction, mammals diversified rapidly, though rapidly still means over millions of years. Within 10 million years of the extinction, mammals had evolved into a wide variety of forms, filling ecological niches left vacant by dinosaurs. Some became herbivores, grazing on the recovering vegetation. Others became predators, hunting the herbivores. Some took to the trees. Others burrowed underground. A few even returned to water, beginning the long evolutionary journey that would lead to whales and dolphins. The Paleocene epoch, from 66 to 56 million years ago, saw the earliest radiation of mammal diversity. Early ungulates, hoofed mammals that would give rise to horses, cattle, deer, and many others, appeared and began diversifying. Primates evolved, initially as small, tree-dwelling insect eaters. Rodents appeared, quickly becoming one of the most successful mammal groups. The world was warm, with forests extending to high latitudes, and mammals spread across the connected landmasses. By the Eocene epoch, 56 to 34 million years ago, mammals had grown larger and more diverse. This was the warmest period of the Cenozoic era, with tropical forests reaching far north into what is now Europe and North America. Crocodiles lived in the Arctic. Palms grew in Alaska. In this hothouse world, mammals flourished. Strange and wonderful forms appeared. Indricotherium, a rhinoceros relative, grew to be the largest land mammal ever, standing about 5 meters tall at the shoulder and weighing perhaps 15-20 tons. Imagine an animal the size of a house, browsing on tree leaves, walking through Eocene forests. Basilosaurus, an early whale, grew up to 18 meters long and looked remarkably snake-like, with a long body and small vestigial hind legs, a reminder of its terrestrial ancestry. In South America, which was then isolated from other continents, unique mammals evolved, including giant ground sloths and bizarre creatures called notungulates. The climate began cooling in the late Eocene. This cooling trend would continue through the Oligocene and into later epochs, driven partly by changes in ocean circulation as continents shifted positions. Antarctica separated from South America, allowing the Antarctic Circumpolar Current to form, which isolated Antarctica and allowed ice sheets to develop. The world was transitioning from the warm greenhouse conditions of the early Cenozoic toward the cooler, more variable climate of recent times. This climate cooling had profound effects on life. Forests gave way to grasslands in many areas. Open savannas and steppes spread across continents. These new habitats favored different traits: speed for escaping predators in open terrain, teeth capable of grinding tough grasses, social behavior for protection and resource finding. Mammals adapted, and new forms arose specifically for grassland living. Horses are a beautiful example of evolution in action, with a particularly good fossil record. The earliest horse, Eohippus, or Hyracotherium, lived about 55 million years ago. It was small, about the size of a dog, with 4 toes on its front feet and 3 on its back feet. It lived in forests and browsed on soft vegetation. Over millions of years, as grasslands spread, horses evolved to be larger, with longer legs for running, teeth adapted for grinding grass, and fewer toes, eventually just one, the hoof, for efficient running. You can trace this evolution through fossils, seeing the gradual changes, slight increase in size here, small modification to teeth there, reduction in toe number in another lineage. It's not a straight line. There were many branches, different horse species trying different adaptations, most going extinct, but the overall trend is clear, and it's driven by environmental change, by the shift from forests to grasslands, by the need to adapt or perish. The Miocene epoch, 23 to 5.3 million years ago, saw further diversification and modernization of mammal groups. Many modern families first appeared in the Miocene. Primates diversified extensively in Africa, giving rise to apes and Old World monkeys. The first true elephants appeared, evolving from smaller ancestors and beginning their journey toward the giants we know today. In the Americas, marsupials in South America and placental mammals in North America continued evolving in isolation from each other. About 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama formed, connecting North and South America. This allowed animals to migrate between the continents in what's called the Great American Biotic Interchange. Northern species moved south: cats, dogs, bears, horses, camels, deer. Southern species moved north: opossums, armadillos, porcupines, ground sloths. The mixing of these long-separated faunas had dramatic effects, with some southern species going extinct in competition with northern invaders, while others thrived. The Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs, from 5.3 million to 11,700 years ago, were characterized by ice ages, repeated cycles of glaciation and warming. Ice sheets advanced and retreated across the northern continents. Sea levels rose and fell by over 100 meters as water was locked up in ice or released during melting. Climates shifted, ecosystems changed, and mammals had to adapt to these fluctuating conditions. Some adaptations were remarkable. Woolly mammoths evolved thick fur coats and layers of fat to survive in the cold periglacial environment. Cave bears hibernated through harsh winters in deep caves. Saber-toothed cats developed elongated canine teeth, though scientists still debate exactly how they used them, probably for killing large prey with a bite to the throat or underbelly. During glacial periods, sea levels were low, exposing land bridges. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia and North America, allowing migrations in both directions. Humans used this bridge to enter the Americas. Other mammals did too: bison, horses, which later went extinct in the Americas but survived in Asia, camels, which originated in North America and migrated to South America and Asia, and many others. Ice ages also created refugia, pockets of suitable habitat where species could survive during harsh times, then expand again when conditions improved. Genetic studies of modern species often show evidence of these refugia, with populations having gone through bottlenecks and then expanded. It's a pattern repeated across many species, a signature of survival through difficulty. And then, starting around 50,000 years ago in Australia and about 15,000, 10,000 years ago elsewhere, something strange happened. Large mammals began going extinct. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, Irish elk, cave bears, and many others disappeared. This quaternary extinction event, sometimes called the Pleistocene megafauna extinction, wiped out most large mammals across the world, particularly those over 40 kilograms. The cause is debated. Climate change, as the Ice Age ended, certainly played a role, but the extinctions correlate closely with human arrival and expansion. As modern humans spread across the globe, large mammals disappeared shortly afterward, First in Australia, then Eurasia, finally the Americas. It seems likely that a combination of factors, climate change, human hunting, and human modification of habitats, drove these extinctions. Large mammals, which reproduce slowly and have small populations, were particularly vulnerable. Africa and Asia retained more large mammals, probably because animals there evolved alongside humans and had time to adapt to our presence. In other continents, where humans arrived suddenly with advanced hunting technologies, megafauna had no such adaptation period. The result was catastrophic for those species. This brings us close to the present, to a world dominated not just by mammals, but by one particular species of primate that evolved in Africa and spread across the globe. But before we get to humans specifically, let's appreciate the larger story. Mammals started as small, nocturnal animals living in the shadow of dinosaurs. After the KPG extinction, they diversified, filling every available niche, from tiny shrews to enormous whales, from desert dwellers to polar specialists, from solitary hunters to social grazers. They developed extraordinary diversity in form and function, all variations on the basic mammalian theme. And among those variations, one lineage of primates would develop something unique, not just large brains, which other mammals have too, but language, abstract thought, culture, technology. We'll explore that story soon. But for now, drift with the image of mammals spreading across a recovering world, adapting to grasslands and forests and deserts and tundra, evolving into countless forms, each one finding its own way to survive, to thrive, to participate in life's grand experiment. The age of mammals is still ongoing, still unfolding, and we're privileged to witness and participate in it. Let's pause here, gently stepping back to see the larger patterns. We've covered 4 billion years of history, moving from origin to diversity, from simple to complex, from sea to land and air. But if you look across this vast span, certain themes repeat, certain rhythms emerge. Understanding these patterns helps us see life not as a series of random events, but as a process with recognizable dynamics. One pattern we've touched on several times is mass extinction events. These are periods when large numbers of species disappear in a relatively short time, geologically speaking, of course. We've mentioned several: the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction that killed the dinosaurs, and the Quaternary megafauna extinction. But there are others, and together they form a pattern worth examining. Scientists recognize at least 5 major mass extinctions in the fossil record, plus numerous smaller ones. Each had different causes, but they share common features. They're relatively rapid, occurring over hundreds of thousands to a few million years. They're global, affecting ecosystems worldwide. They're non-selective to some degree. Even successful, well-adapted species disappear. And they're followed by periods of low diversity, and then eventual recovery and radiation of new forms. The first major mass extinction occurred at the end of the Ordovician period, about 445 million years ago. This was primarily a marine extinction, killing perhaps 85% of marine species. The cause was likely a rapid climate change as the supercontinent Gondwana drifted over the South Pole, triggering glaciation. Ice sheets grew, locking up water and dropping sea levels. Shallow marine habitats, which were very diverse, shrank or disappeared. Then, as the ice melted, sea levels rose rapidly, but the damage was done. Many species couldn't adapt to such rapid changes. The late Devonian extinctions, occurring in pulses between 375 and 359 million years ago, affected both marine and terrestrial life. Reef-building organisms were particularly hard hit. Possible causes include impacts, volcanism, and ocean anoxia, depletion of oxygen in ocean waters, possibly triggered by the spread of plants on land. As plants spread, they increased weathering, which washed nutrients into the ocean, causing algae blooms that consumed oxygen when they died and decomposed. It's an example of how changes in one part of the biosphere can have cascading effects elsewhere. We've already discussed the Permian-Triassic extinction, the worst of all, killing 90% or more of species. The Siberian traps volcanism seems to be the primary culprit, though the exact mechanisms of death, warming, acidification, anoxia are still being worked out. What's clear is that ecosystems collapsed and recovery took millions of years. It was Earth's closest brush with total sterilization, at least since life became well established. The Triassic-Jurassic extinction, 201 million years ago, eliminated about 75% of species. Volcanic activity again seems implicated. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province, associated with the breakup of Pangaea, released massive amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases. This extinction cleared the way for dinosaurs to become dominant, setting up the Mesozoic as the age of reptiles. And then the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, 66 million years ago, which we've discussed in detail. Asteroid impact, immediate devastation, followed by long-term environmental changes. This one we understand fairly well because it's relatively recent and evidence has been preserved. The iridium layer marking the impact, shocked quartz, tsunami deposits, the Chicxulub crater itself. Beyond these big five, there have been numerous smaller extinctions. Some were regional, affecting only certain areas. Others were more widespread, but less severe than the major ones. The pattern is that extinction is not rare. It's part of the normal operation of the biosphere, a constant background process. Most species that have ever existed are extinct. The fossil record is primarily a record of things that no longer exist. But here's something fascinating. Extinctions, especially major ones, are often followed by radiations, periods of rapid diversification, when new species appear and fill ecological niches. The KPG extinction wiped out dinosaurs, but allowed mammals to radiate. The Permian-Triassic extinction cleared the way for the dinosaurs to eventually dominate. The Ordovician extinction was followed by the diversification of fish. It's as if extinction creates opportunity, clearing away established players and allowing innovation. This isn't to say extinction is good. For the species going extinct, it's certainly not. But from the perspective of life as a whole, extinctions reshape the biosphere, prevent stagnation, create openings for new forms. They're like forest fires, which are destructive in the moment, but create conditions for new growth. Evolution proceeds partly through this cycle of destruction and renewal, of extinction creating opportunity for innovation. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called punctuated equilibrium, proposed by Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould. It suggests that evolution isn't always gradual. Species often remain stable for long periods, equilibrium, punctuated by rapid changes. These rapid changes might occur during environmental disruptions, when selection pressures suddenly shift. It's an alternative to the view of evolution as slow, constant, gradual change. Instead, there are periods of stasis and periods of rapid transition. The fossil record seems to support this pattern, though it's debated. Many species appear suddenly in the fossil record, remain largely unchanged for millions of years, then disappear. The changes seem concentrated at certain times and places. Whether this reflects true evolutionary patterns or just artifacts of preservation and sampling remains a question, but it's an intriguing idea. Evolution as less of a smooth ramp and more of a staircase, with flat steps and sudden rises. Another pattern worth noting is convergent evolution, when unrelated organisms evolve similar features independently. This happens because certain problems have limited good solutions. For flight, you need wings, a light body, efficient metabolism. Birds, bats, and pterosaurs all evolved flight independently, and they all developed wings, though the anatomical details differ. Marine animals that need to swim fast, fish, ichthyosaurs, dolphins, all evolved streamlined bodies, even though they're very distantly related. The environment poses problems, and evolution finds similar solutions, over and over. This suggests that evolution isn't completely unpredictable. There are constraints, both physical and biological, that channel evolution in certain directions. If we replayed life's history, we'd get different specific species, but we might get similar general forms. The details would differ, but the themes might recur. Or perhaps not. Some scientists argue that contingency, chance events, plays a huge role, and replaying history would give vastly different results. It's a fascinating debate about determinism versus chance in evolution. There's also the pattern of increasing complexity over time, though this requires careful interpretation. The earliest life was simple, single-celled. Over time, more complex forms evolved. Multicellular organisms, organisms with specialized organs, organisms with nervous systems and brains. This seems like a trend toward complexity. But simple organisms haven't disappeared. Bacteria are still dominant in many measures, and complexity isn't always better. Many successful organisms are quite simple. The trend might be less about progress and more about expanding into available possibility space. Simple forms appear first because they're easier to evolve. Complex forms come later, building on simpler foundations, exploring possibilities that require more organizational structure. Stephen Jay Gould used the metaphor of a drunkard's walk to describe this. Imagine a drunk person at a bar next to a wall. They stumble randomly, but because they can't go through the wall, they tend to move away from it. It looks like directed movement, but it's really just random movement with a boundary. Similarly, life started at the minimum complexity. There's no simpler way to be alive than a single cell. Any change was likely to increase complexity or stay the same. So over time, the maximum complexity increased, but the minimum stayed the same, and most species remained relatively simple. One more pattern: the role of catastrophe and chance in shaping life's history. If the asteroid hadn't hit 66 million years ago, dinosaurs might still dominate, and mammals might still be small creatures in the underbrush. If the Permian volcanism had been less severe or occurred elsewhere, the extinction might have been less catastrophic. If oxygen-producing photosynthesis had never evolved or evolved much later, life might have remained simple. The specific history we observe includes many contingent events, accidents of circumstance, that profoundly shaped outcomes. This is humbling. It suggests that life's history isn't inevitable, isn't following some predetermined path. Humans aren't the goal evolution was working toward. We're one outcome of a long, contingent process, shaped by environmental changes, extinction events, and evolutionary innovations, some of which were unlikely. In another timeline, with slightly different circumstances, intelligent technological species might never have evolved. Or they might have evolved very differently, from a different lineage, with different characteristics. Yet amid all this contingency, there are patterns. Life persists, adapts, fills niches. Extinctions clear the stage for radiations. Evolution finds similar solutions to similar problems. Complexity increases in the maximum, even if the average stays relatively stable. And the process continues, even now, with species evolving, going extinct, adapting to changing conditions. We're living in a moment of this vast sweep, participants in an ongoing story whose ending we can't know. So rest with these patterns, these rhythms of deep time, extinction and radiation, stasis and change, simplicity and complexity, contingency and constraint. They're the dynamics of life on Earth, playing out over billions of years, creating the astonishing diversity we see today from the simplest beginnings. It's a story still being written, and we're fortunate to be aware of it, to study it, to marvel at its scope and beauty. Now, quietly and gently, we arrive at the part of the story that's most familiar to us, the emergence of humans. This is recent history by Earth's standards, just a few million years, a blink in geological time. But it's our history, the lineage that led to us lying here right now, contemplating 4 billion years of life. Humans are primates, a group that first appeared in the Paleocene about 65 million years ago, shortly after the KP extinction. Early primates were small tree-dwelling animals, probably similar to modern tree shrews or lemurs. They evolved grasping hands and feet for climbing, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and relatively large brains for their body size. These traits, originally adaptations for life in the trees, would later be important for our lineage. Primates diversified through the Cenozoic. By the Oligocene, apes and Old World monkeys had diverged. By the Miocene, the ape lineage was diversifying in Africa and Asia. Somewhere between 10 and 5 million years ago, the lineage that would lead to humans diverged from the lineage that led to chimpanzees and bonobos, our closest living relatives. We share about 98 to 99% of our DNA with chimps, reflecting our recent common ancestry. The hominin lineage, species more closely related to humans than to chimps, began in Africa. The earliest known hominins, from around 6 to 7 million years ago, show one key innovation: bipedalism, walking on two legs. Sahelanthropus and Aurorin, known from fragmentary fossils, may have been bipedal. By 4 million years ago, Australopithecus species were definitely bipedal, though they retained adaptations for climbing and may have spent significant time in trees. Why bipedalism? Several hypotheses exist. Walking on two legs frees the hands for carrying things: tools, food, infants. It allows seeing over tall grass in savanna environments. It's more energy efficient than quadrupedal walking over long distances. It reduces exposure to the sun, keeping the body cooler. Probably multiple factors favored bipedalism, and it became a defining characteristic of our lineage. Australopithecines walked upright, but had small brains, about the size of chimp brains. They were probably about 1 to 1.5 meters tall, weighing 30 to 50 kilograms. They lived in Africa, in a variety of habitats from woodlands to more open grasslands. Some species, like Australopithecus afarensis, famously represented by Lucy, a remarkably complete skeleton, show a mix of primitive and derived features, perfectly capturing their transitional position between tree-dwelling apes and later, more human-like species. Around 2.5 million years ago, the genus Homo appeared. These were the first hominins with notably larger brains and the first to make stone tools consistently. Homo habilis, handyman, made simple stone tools by striking rocks together to create sharp flakes. These weren't sophisticated by later standards, but they were a start, a new way of interacting with the environment. Tools extended capabilities. You could cut meat more easily, access bone marrow, process plant foods, and making tools selected for intelligence, manual dexterity, and the ability to learn complex skills. Homo erectus appeared about 1.9 million years ago and represents another major step. They had larger brains, made more sophisticated tools, used fire, and migrated out of Africa into Asia and possibly Europe. Homo erectus persisted for over 1.5 million years, an incredibly successful species, lasting far longer than our own species has existed so far. They walked fully upright, hence the name, and had body proportions similar to modern humans, adapted for efficient walking and running over long distances. The use of fire was transformative. Fire provides warmth, allowing expansion into colder climates. It protects from predators. It can be used to shape tools. And crucially, it allows cooking, which makes food more digestible, provides more calories, and reduces the need for large jaws and teeth for processing tough foods. Some scientists argue that cooking enabled the evolution of our large brains, which require enormous amounts of energy. About 20% of our total caloric intake goes to the brain, much more than in other primates. Between about 600,000 and 200,000 years ago, several hominin species existed, with complex relationships and occasional interbreeding. This period saw the evolution of Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in Asia, and Homo sapiens, our species, in Africa. There may have been other species too, known only from fragmentary fossils. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Early Homo sapiens had somewhat different skull shapes from later populations, but were fundamentally similar. By about 100,000 years ago, humans had the full suite of modern anatomical features. And by about 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, there's clear evidence of modern behavior, complex tools, symbolic art, burial of the dead with grave goods, long-distance trade networks, and probably language in its full modern form. Language is worth pausing over. It's probably our most distinctive trait, more even than large brains or tool use. Language allows us to share complex information, to teach skills, to coordinate group actions, to tell stories, to plan for the future, to discuss things that aren't physically present. It creates culture, bodies of knowledge and practice passed down through generations, accumulated and refined. No other species has anything quite like it. Around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, modern humans began migrating out of Africa. They spread through Asia, reaching Australia by about 65,000 years ago, requiring boats to cross water gaps, showing sophisticated technology and planning. They entered Europe around 45,000 years ago, where they encountered Neanderthals, a species that had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years. The two species interbred. Most modern humans outside Africa carry 1 to 3% Neanderthal DNA. But eventually, Neanderthals went extinct, disappearing around 40,000 years ago. We don't know exactly why, but it probably involved competition with modern humans, possibly exacerbated by climate change. Humans reached the Americas late, probably around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, though this is debated. They crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia and spread south, reaching South America within a few thousand years. And as we discussed earlier, their arrival correlates with the extinction of megafauna across the Americas. About 12,000 years ago, some human populations began domesticating plants and animals independently in several regions. This was the agricultural revolution, or Neolithic revolution, and it fundamentally changed human society. Agriculture allowed denser populations, permanent settlements, food surpluses that could support specialists, craftspeople, religious leaders, eventually rulers and soldiers. It led to the development of civilization, cities, writing, complex technologies. But agriculture also brought challenges. Diets became less diverse, health often declined, and diseases increased in dense populations. Social inequality emerged as some people accumulated wealth and power. Warfare became more organized and lethal. Agriculture was not purely positive. It was a trade-off, increasing carrying capacity and allowing population growth at the cost of other values. From agriculture came civilization. From civilization came the modern world. Writing appeared independently in several places: Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, Mesoamerica. Cities grew. Empires rose and fell. Technologies advanced: bronze, iron, eventually steel. Trade networks spanned continents. Ideas spread and evolved. And all of this, remember, happened in just the last few thousand years, a tiny fraction of human history, let alone life's history. The Industrial Revolution, beginning about 250 years ago, accelerated change dramatically. Machines powered by fossil fuels replaced human and animal labor. Production increased exponentially. Population exploded. We went from about 1 billion humans in 1800 to over 8 billion today. Our impact on the planet increased correspondingly. We've reshaped landscapes, driven countless species extinct, altered the climate, and left a mark that will be visible in the geological record long after our civilization ends. This brings us to the present moment, to you lying here, the current endpoint of a 4 billion year story. You're made of atoms forged in stars, organized according to principles that emerged from chemistry on early Earth, embodying genetic information passed down through an unbroken lineage from the first cells. You carry mitochondria descended from ancient bacteria. Your body plan was established in the Cambrian. Your distant ancestors lived in trees, walked on 4 legs, swam in Devonian seas, crawled on carboniferous shores. You're part of this vast tapestry. this magnificent saga of life. Not the goal, not the pinnacle, just a participant, a moment in the ongoing process. Your consciousness, your thoughts, your ability to lie here and contemplate deep time. These are recent innovations, products of the last few 100,000 years of evolution. And yet they allow you to connect with the entire history we've discussed, to appreciate the journey that led here. What comes next? We don't know. Humans might continue for millions of years, evolving, spreading to other worlds, transforming in ways we can't imagine. Or we might go extinct, another species that had its moment and passed. Life will continue regardless, adapting, diversifying, filling niches. The story isn't over. It continues, and we're fortunate to be aware of it, to participate consciously in the grand experiment of life on Earth. So rest with this. You are stardust contemplating stars. You are the universe becoming aware of itself. You are 4 billion years of evolutionary history, walking around, breathing, thinking, wondering. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you carry all of that with you. A living link to the deep past, a participant in the present, and a tiny part of whatever future awaits. It's quite remarkable, really, when you think about it. Though perhaps thinking about it is less important now than simply feeling it, settling into the gentle wonder of existence. We've traveled through deep time, from Earth's violent beginning to the present. Now let's look at life as it exists today, the current snapshot in an ongoing story, the world you inhabit and share with millions of other species. Life today is extraordinarily diverse. Scientists have described about 1.5 to 2 million species, but estimates of total diversity range from 5 to 10 million species, possibly more. Most undiscovered species are small, insects, fungi, microorganisms, or live in poorly explored environments like deep oceans, tropical rainforests, or soil. We're still cataloguing Earth's inhabitants, still discovering new forms even as others go extinct. The major groups of life today reflect billions of years of evolution. Bacteria and archaea remain abundant and essential, still outnumbering all eukaryotes, still cycling nutrients and energy through ecosystems. Protists, single-celled eukaryotes, are diverse and important, though often overlooked. They form the base of many aquatic food webs, with photosynthetic species producing much of Earth's oxygen. Fungi are a kingdom unto themselves, neither plants nor animals, but something distinct. They decompose organic matter, returning nutrients to soil. They form partnerships with plant roots, mycorrhizae, helping plants absorb water and minerals. They produce antibiotics, like penicillin, that revolutionized medicine. And they include everything from microscopic yeasts to massive underground networks that can span hectares. Plants dominate terrestrial landscapes, producing oxygen and sugars through photosynthesis, forming the base of most land food webs. Flowering plants, angiosperms, are by far the most diverse and successful plant group today, with over 300,000 species. They've co-evolved with pollinators, bees, butterflies, birds, bats, creating intricate relationships of mutual benefit. They produce fruits to entice animals to disperse their seeds. They've developed countless chemical defenses against herbivores, and those chemicals now provide medicines, spices, and countless other products we use. Animals are what we notice most, being animals ourselves. Arthropods, insects, spiders, crustaceans are the most diverse animal group, with over 1 million described species. Insects are found in nearly every terrestrial environment, playing roles as pollinators, decomposers, predators, and herbivores. They're essential to ecosystem function, and their decline in many regions is deeply concerning. Vertebrates, despite being familiar, are relatively rare in terms of species number. About 70,000 species, compared to over 1 million arthropods. But they're diverse in form and function. Fish are the most diverse vertebrate group, with over 30,000 species occupying rivers, lakes, and oceans. Amphibians, with about 8,000 species, live dual lives between water and land. Reptiles, about 11,000 species, include turtles, lizards, snakes, and crocodiles. Birds, descendants of theropod dinosaurs, number about 10,000 species and occupy almost every habitat. And mammals, our group, comprise about 6,400 species, from tiny shrews to blue whales, the largest animals ever to exist. This diversity isn't evenly distributed. Tropical regions, particularly rainforests and coral reefs, harbour the greatest concentration of species. These areas have stable climates, long growing seasons, and complex habitats that support myriad specialists. Moving toward the poles, diversity generally decreases, though polar regions have their own unique and well-adapted species. But this diversity is under threat. We're currently experiencing what many scientists call the sixth extinction, a human-caused mass extinction event. Species are disappearing at rates perhaps 100 to 1,000 times the natural background rate. The causes are multiple. Habitat destruction as we convert land for agriculture and development, overharvesting of wild populations, pollution, introduction of invasive species, and climate change from burning fossil fuels. Climate change deserves particular attention. By releasing carbon dioxide from burning coal, oil, and gas, we've increased atmospheric CO2 from about 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution to over 410 ppm today. This has warmed the planet by about 1.1 degrees Celsius so far, with more warming inevitable given the CO2 already in the atmosphere. Oceans are warming and acidifying. Ice sheets are melting. Weather patterns are shifting, and species are struggling to adapt. Some species can shift their ranges, moving poleward or to higher elevations as temperatures rise. Others can alter their timing, breeding earlier or migrating at different times. But many species, particularly those with narrow habitat requirements or limited mobility, face severe challenges. Coral reefs, already stressed by warming waters, experience bleaching when temperatures exceed tolerance limits. Polar species, dependent on ice, lose habitat as ice retreats. Plants adapted to specific climate conditions find their ranges shrinking. The combination of all these pressures, habitat loss, overharvesting, pollution, invasive species, climate change, creates a perfect storm for extinction. And unlike previous mass extinctions caused by volcanism or asteroids, this one is caused by a single species, us. We have the knowledge to understand what's happening. The question is whether we have the will to change course. Yet amid these challenges, there's also hope and positive action. Conservation efforts have brought some species back from the brink. Bald eagles, once nearly extinct in the United States due to pesticide poisoning, have recovered after DDT was banned. Giant pandas, through dedicated conservation work in China, have increased in number. Protected areas have been established worldwide, preserving habitats and species. Renewable energy technologies are advancing, offering paths away from fossil fuels, and science continues to reveal the intricacy and beauty of life. We're discovering that many animals have far richer cognitive and emotional lives than previously thought. Elephants mourn their dead. Crows solve complex problems. Octopuses show curiosity and playfulness. Dolphins have individual names. Bees communicate through dances. These discoveries increase our appreciation and, hopefully, our commitment to preservation. We're also learning about connections, about how ecosystems function as integrated wholes. Forests aren't just collections of trees, but networks linked by mycorrhizal fungi, with trees sharing nutrients through these underground connections. Oceans aren't just water, but three-dimensional habitats with vertical layers, currents, and chemical gradients. Species aren't isolated, but embedded in food webs, mutualistic relationships, and competitive interactions. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we have yet to understand. There's beauty in this moment, in life as it exists now. A monarch butterfly migrating thousands of kilometers navigating by a magnetic sense we barely understand. A humpback whale, singing complex songs in the ocean depths, communicating across hundreds of kilometers. A giant sequoia standing 80 meters tall, having grown for over 2,000 years. A living connection to the past. Fireflies flashing in summer evenings, each species with its own pattern, a language of light. And there's beauty in the mundane too. A sparrow bathing in a puddle, a spider spinning its web in morning dew, moss growing on rocks, patient and slow, mushrooms fruiting after rain. The natural world continues its processes, largely unaware of human concerns, simply existing, persisting, following patterns established over millions of years. You're part of this world. Your body hosts trillions of bacteria, your microbiome, without which you couldn't digest food or maintain health. Your breath is connected to plant photosynthesis and bacterial nitrogen fixation. Your existence depends on ecosystem services, pollination, water purification, climate regulation, provided by other species. You're not separate from nature. You're embedded in it, dependent on it, part of it. So as you lie here, breathing slowly, you're participating in an exchange as old as life itself, breathing in oxygen, produced by photosynthesis, breathing out carbon dioxide that plants will use. You're part of Earth's carbon cycle, its nitrogen cycle, its water cycle. You're a node in countless networks of matter and energy flow, and your consciousness allows you to appreciate this, to marvel at your place in the grand scheme. The present moment of life on Earth is complex, threatened, beautiful, and ongoing. It's a moment of crisis, but also opportunity, of loss, but also resilience. The story continues, and its next chapters are yet unwritten. We have a role in how those chapters unfold, particularly regarding conservation, climate, and our relationship with the rest of the living world. But regardless of human actions, life will persist in some form, adapting, evolving, finding new ways to exist. It's been doing so for 4 billion years, and it's remarkably good at it. Rest with that resilience, that persistence. Life has survived worse than what we're currently facing. Not all species, not all ecosystems, but life as a phenomenon, as a process, as a planetary force. It's tenacious, creative, adaptable beyond imagining. And you're part of that, carrying forward the story, breathing the air, thinking these thoughts, drifting gently towards sleep while the world continues its ancient processes all around you. What is life? How did it begin? How did it become the diverse, complex, beautiful phenomenon we see today? These are the questions that brought us here, whispered softly at the beginning like a child asking where they came from, wanting to understand their origin, their place in the vast unfolding of time. We've learned that life emerged from chemistry, from simple molecules combining in ways that eventually became self-replicating, evolving, growing in complexity. We've explored how single cells gave rise to complex cells, how those cells formed multicellular organisms, how life moved from sea to land, how extinction and radiation shaped diversity. We've discovered the remarkable story of how mammals emerged from the shadow of dinosaurs, how primates evolved in forests, and how one particular primate species became aware of its own history, capable of looking back across billions of years and marveling at the journey. Maybe life doesn't have a simple definition. Maybe it's not a thing but a process, not a state but a constant becoming, not an arrival but an endless journey. Maybe that's the whole point. Life isn't static. It's dynamic, always changing, always adapting, always exploring new possibilities. And maybe that's what makes it so remarkable. Not where it is, but where it's been and where it might go. So with all of this in mind, are you still awake? If you are, I hope it's not because I was too interesting, though the history of life is rather captivating. If I've kept you up, well, at least you've learned something about the extraordinary 4 billion year journey that led to this moment, to you lying here, the current endpoint of evolution's long experiment. And if you're already drifting away, may your dreams be filled with ancient seas, forests full of strange creatures, and the quiet wonder of deep time. Before you drift off completely, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop a comment and share. Are you perhaps a student of biology, pondering these ancient mysteries, or someone who simply finds the history of life strangely comforting and sleep-inducing? If you found this gentle journey through the history of life relaxing or informative, or both, please do consider giving this video a like and subscribing to Sleepy Science Student. It's a small gesture that helps me keep bringing you more calming, curious content from the world of science and beyond. There are so many more stories to tell: the formation of stars, the nature of time, the mysteries of consciousness, all waiting to be explored in that same soft, contemplative way. Thank you for joining me on this journey through 4 billion years. Sleep well, dream deep, and may your thoughts be filled with the patient unfolding of evolution, the slow accumulation of change, and the remarkable fact that you are here at all, the product of an unbroken chain of life stretching back to Earth's earliest days. Remember, every breath you take connects you to the first photosynthetic bacteria. Every thought you think uses structures refined over millions of years. Every moment of your existence is a testament to life's extraordinary persistence and creativity. You don't have to understand it all. You don't have to remember the names or dates or details. You just have to rest with the wonder of it, the sheer improbability and beauty of the fact that the universe became alive, became aware, became able to contemplate its own history. That's what you are. The universe looking at itself, marveling at how far it's come. Good night.